I'm Jon Rawl. Great to have you back here on the show that's all about the Southeast. And Texas is certainly a big part of y'all country. And if you're watching our video version of the Y'all Show right now, right here beside me is that beautiful Lone Star flag. And Texans are quite proud of that flag. They're quite proud of that state. And they're quite proud of the history of the state of Texas. And to illustrate that history and to showcase music about Texas independence, we are going to welcome in a very special guest, Blake Winchell. He is a writer, and he's got a book out, and it's about the Alamo, that 1836 battle there in San Antonio. And he's got this musical that honors those who gave their lives for Texas independence. And Blake is joining us right now on the Y'all Show. Hello.
Hi, John. Thanks very much for having me.
And remember the Alamo.
And do remember the Alamo.
All right. So before we get into Texas and Alamo and all that, if you don't mind, first of all, are you a Texan?
I am indeed. I grew up in Houston and Austin, and I knew that my family went back a few generations in Texas, but until I started working on this show, I didn't really know how far. And as part of my background on the show, I actually did some background on myself and found out that I'm actually an 8th-generation Texan. My great-great-great-great-grandfather came to Texas from Virginia in 1831, and he settled in Stephen F. Austin's colony and was given a league and a labor of land, which is 4,600 acres, and he fought with General Sam Houston in the Battle of San Jacinto, which defeated the Santa Anna Army, Mexican Army of Operations. So I didn't know any of that until I started working on the show.
You didn't know any of that? My goodness, what was your family doing hiding that great information? I mean, that is an amazing Texas lineage you have there, Blake.
Nobody else in my family knew it either. I kind of just did some poking around and found out about George Washington Brooks, who was the great grandfather that I was mentioning, who came over with his bride from Virginia.
What was that last name?
His name is George Washington Brooks.
Brooks, okay. I don't know if they've named a county or hamlet there in Texas after him, but they ought to. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you've done all these years after discovering your Texas lineage. Have you been working with musicals and writing books about Texas in the past before the Alamo Project came about?
I have been working in theater. And in fact, just to be clear, I did not write a book. What I wrote was a musical. I wrote what is called the book, which is the dialogue and the lyrics. So This is an e-book. It's a musical, a dramatic musical about Texas, and I wrote the dialogue and the lyrics to the songs, and then I have a collaborator, Brett Strader, who wrote an amazing orchestration, literally a symphony around the show as well. But I started out. My first real professional gig was at Six Flags Astroworld in Houston, where I was the youngest member of the Crystal Palace Singers, and I went on to college and minored in theater, and I've really kind of enjoyed theater all my life. I knew I wasn't good enough to make a living at it, so luckily I didn't go down that road, but I've been able to keep to continue dabbling in it since I was in high school.
Well, amazing that you've got this after the year. If I'm not mistaken, your professional career has really not been anything connected to musicals and the arts, right? Haven't you had a so-called day job?
Yeah, I sort of support my family by being a venture capitalist here in Silicon Valley.
Not a bad job.
Well, sometimes it's better than others. Right now, the markets are treating us pretty well.
Okay. Well, good. A venture capitalist. Well, that is a very noble thing. And they're in California, I think is where you're based out of. But got those Texas roots. Don't want to forget it. So Remember is your musical, and it honors, again, Texans who fought there. Sam Houston wasn't there at Alamo, but you had the people like Davy Crockett, you had Colonel Travis and others. And
right.
Growing up, I guess, as you did in Texas, Is it inundated from birth about the heroes of the Alamo?
I'm not sure it was inundated from birth, but like most people in the seventh grade, you study the history of your state. And so, when I was in the seventh grade, it was Texas state history, and we learned all about the Alamo. And I obviously knew the story, as most good Texans do, but I didn't know a lot of the history and certainly the backstory. So when I decided to write this musical, and I started to do some research, I read 3 or 4 books about the Alamo. One of the things that struck me and that I learned is that these men who came to Texas, Davy Crockett, Sam Houston, Jim Bowie, and William Barrett Travis, they all had their own backstories from where they were coming from. Jim Bowie was actually with his brother Resin Bowie. They were forging land deeds, and the law was after them, which is one of the reasons that they left and came to Texas. William Barrett Travis was a lawyer who really wasn't making much money. He tried to run a newspaper, and the newspaper didn't work out well. He was getting foreclosed on by his creditors, and so he ran to Texas. And most people know that Davy Crockett had lost an election to William Huntsman, and lost his place in the House of Representatives. And so he delivered the famous line to his constituents, "You can all go to hell, and I'm going to Texas." And that's what brought him there.
Said that in Madison County, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, I think on the courthouse steps there is David Crockett.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And then Sam Houston, who had been the governor of Tennessee, was actually tried for caning a senator who had spread malicious rumors about him, and he was tried in Washington D.C. and fined by the judge, and he got so angry that he left and came to Houston. So all these men that we look at that are Texas heroes, they all came to Texas with their own story, and the first half of the show really is telling the story about how these men happened to be there in the first place.
Wow. Visiting with Blake Winchell, who has penned and composed the musical The Alamo. It's called Remember, is what it's called. And when did you first actually start putting pen to paper and coming up with some of the songs that are a part of this musical?
About 6 years ago is when it took about a year to write it, and I started writing it about 6 years ago, and then I gave the script and which has the lyrics and the dialogue to my good friend Brett Strader and asked him if he would be willing to compose the music. Unlike most of the theater productions that your audience is probably familiar with, John, this is not done for a pit band. This is composed for a 60-person symphony. So when we do this in San Antonio on February 29th, there'll be a 60-person symphony on stage, a 75-voice chorus behind them on stage, and then 11 principal actors and soloists in addition to the conductor. So there'll be almost 150 people on stage performing this piece.
And one of the neat things about what's happening February 29th and going forward, proceeds from this benefit the Remember the Alamo Foundation. What is that foundation, Blake?
That's a foundation that is raising money for the new Alamo Museum. They are any of your listeners who have been to the Alamo know that with Texas' lack of zoning control, the strip centers and other commercial buildings have gotten closer and closer to what's left of the Alamo, as everybody thinks about that iconic exterior, which is the church. And what they want to do is raise $150 to $200 million, and they're well along in trying to do that, to buy all of these commercial properties that are around the Alamo and to create a really magnificent Alamo Museum. And so Brett and I are contributing our intellectual property and our time, and the Alamo is going to use the proceeds as part of that that money that they're raising.
Again, that kind of kicks off with February 29th concert in San Antonio. Where is that going to be?
It's going to be at the Tobin Center in the HEB Hall. It's a 1,700 seat concert hall, which is large even by Broadway standards. So it's the home of the San Antonio Symphony and the San Antonio Ballet. And it will be hosting Remember on February 29th. There'll be a matinee at 2 and an evening performance at 7.
And will this Remember go on beyond that particular weekend?
Not in San Antonio. One of the challenges for us was that when we were asked to do this by the Alamo, we had to find a time when the Tobin Center, a weekend during Texas Independence Day celebration, where the Tobin Center was open and where the San Antonio Symphony wasn't booked. And February 29th literally was the only day where those three things came together. So we're going to do it. It's two performances, one day only, and then we'll kind of see what happens from there. We don't really have any plans for it after this.
Well, it looks like the Lone Star aligned here in 2020, and we gave you an extra day in the month of February to pull this off, Leap Day, February 29th. Talking to Blake Winchell with the Remember musical that's about to kick off in the lovely town of San Antonio, Texas. And Blake, I want to ask you, if you're there and in attendance, or if you're not able to make it this weekend, hopefully it'll be coming to a town near you soon. What are some of the songs? Tell me about the inspiration behind some of the songs of Remember.
Oh, good. That's a really good question, John. So it opens with, of course, there's an overture, as there is in most musicals. It opens with a song that's sung by Stephen F. Austin called "Land of Hope," where he is introducing the settlers to the beautiful state of Texas, and he's singing about the bountiful forests and the rich soil and all of the rivers and lakes. And he sings a song called "Land of Hope," and then basically goes through 4 scenes of each of kind of those major characters that I mentioned, starting with Jim Bowie and his brother Resin, and talk about their backstory. They've got a song called "Working the Con," because they literally are con artists. They're forging land deeds. Then Davy Crockett sings a song called "Larger Than Life," but he was a very, very colorful character. Sam Houston sings a song called "Cherokee Nation." Most people don't know that Sam Houston was brought up by the Cherokees. He was nicknamed for the Crow, and he was brought up by the Cherokees. And so he sings a song about his growing up among the Cherokee, who taught him how to hunt and fish. And then the last of the songs from the beginning, from kind of the first half, is William Barrett Travis, who's on the land from the sheriff. He sings a song called "Gone to Texas." Santa Ana's got a song called "Rebel" that he sings when he finds out that the Texans have had a Congress and have decided to declare independence. And so he and his Major General, General Koss, have a song called "Rebel." And then we have the people in Texas singing at the convention a song called "Our Rights," where they're talking about the rights that they believe that they should have that Santa Ana has taken away. Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett and Bowie sing a song called "Fortune, Family, and Freedom," which is about what they have found when they got to Texas and how they restarted their lives. And then William Barrett Travis draws his famous line in the sand, and for people to step over if they're willing to stay and fight. And he has got a beautiful song called "Something to Fight For." And then there's the battle scene, which is actually a 4 or 5 minute symphony, kind of like the 1812 overture, where it is the battle played out in music. And the show ends with a song by Stephen F. Austin called "Remember."
And that, of course, the title of this great musical.
Right.
And did you write most of these by yourself? Did you team up with Brett on a lot of the songs? How did that work out?
I wrote all the lyrics, and then Brett took my lyrics and imagined what the music would sound like, and then he wrote what are called lead sheets for all of those. So he wrote kind of the melody for each of them, and then they've now all been orchestrated for a 60-person orchestra. So you've got the violins and violas and cellos and timpani and all that. Those are all got separate parts that Brett has written.
Well, a great collaboration there with Blake and also his composer friend Brett there, as the Remember musical hits San Antonio on Leap Day, February 29th. And we just can't thank Blake you enough for coming on the Y'all Show and talking to us about your musical. We wish you the best of luck there. And selfishly, if you don't live in San Antonio and you're somewhere in Texas, you're actually sitting here saying, hey, Blake, bring this to my area. Hey, I'm outside of Texas. Bring it to places like Tennessee and South Carolina, which I got to give a plug, as Colonel Travis was from Edgefield District there in South Carolina. And, of course, Tennessee provided so many of the characters that unfortunately perished there in that battle in 1836. Roughly 250 people died at the siege there at the Battle of Alamo in 1836. And we want to remember that Texas effort for independence was such a big game changer for that area and really the whole country, from that moment where we were able to have Texas become an independent republic and then later a state, really set forward this manifest destiny. Even it put it on steroids, to be honest with you. And your Remember is a great way to remember that. That was an intentional pun there, by the way. And
that's good.
And we want to remember and go learn more about Alamo. I know there's been multiple movies, but I bet you, Blake, you're going to tell me there's really never been a musical about the Alamo.
There's never been a stage play that I know of, much less one that's with an orchestra. And John, I just tell you that I've actually got friends that are flying in from South Carolina for this. There are people coming from all over Texas. There are a lot of people who love the Alamo and love what it stands for, and they're not going to let a few hundred miles separate them from seeing the show. So I'd encourage anybody who's within driving or flying distance who loves the Alamo to come to celebrate Texas Independence Day on February 29th and see the show. There's still tickets available.
Well, Blake Winchell, thank you very much for what you did, and thank you for coming on the Y'all Show to promote Remember. Remember, y'all, remember the Alamo, and remember. Thank you, and best of luck.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it.
More of the Y'all Show will continue, and we've got some great Texas-style music to send us to break. Stay tuned to the show that is all about the South.